And Schwetzingen was a summer palace. I think of the Elector of the Palatine, maybe. Anyway, one of these German princes. And so this is a rather wonderful 18th century garden, sort of 1780s kind of thing. And it's just rather magical, you know. And you're so used to going to beautiful gardens in other places, and Germany not so much, although it is absolutely full of them. But anyway, here we are in Schwetzingen, and so this is just a lovely little pavilion, and most of it, of course, is hidden behind the hedge. But isn't that a wonderful way to make a really chic little front for a building? And I went there on an early morning in a summer, sort of 20 years ago or something, driving to Italy, and by a slightly circuitous route, it must be said. But you can see this incredible light, and I mean, it was so magical, and there wasn't a single person there, literally not one. It was fantastic. I mean, partly because it was early in the morning, and partly because I suppose who wants to go to a German garden in the summer, you know? But it is really beautiful, and so here's a couple of rather funny-looking lions. I think it was being restored, and it sort of had been replanted not that long before. So it gives you a kind of an idea of how Versailles and Marly and places were at the time of Louis XIV, which is always quite interesting because now they're so completely different, you know. But look at those trees, aren't they fantastic? The way they've been made into sort of arcades. Love that. And then here's this wonderful sort of gloriette thing, which obviously ought to have a working fountain and all of that kind of thing. But I think the fountain wasn't working when I went, but it was working when this guy went. And look, he's sitting there feeling very contemplative and intellectual and shaded by these lovely trees. And this must be about 1820 or something, I suppose. And at that point, you see the white marble figures holding the urn, pouring water onto the sort of waterfall. Looked perfect, you see, and you can see them outlined against the local red sandstone that they're set into. And now, of course, they've let things slide a bit, and so the blocks of white marble that they're carved from, the ground bit of them, ought to be painted the colour of the red sandstone. And they've forgotten to do that, because people just don't do things properly anymore, do they? And it's got this rather wonderful place for sort of, you know, decorative Germans to hang out behind a railing. And the railing's very sort of Louis XIV, you know, with a great sunburst, gilded, a rather nice sort of baroque kind of urn thing with a nautical motif. And then here's a very funny little sort of summer house thing attached to a bigger building. And I rather love that. And you can feel those breezes going through that trellis work downstairs, can't you? And then this is a fantastic thing. It's a terribly bad photograph of it. And I couldn't get into it. It was all locked up. But it's basically a long sort of pergola. You're meant to be able to walk along it, you see. And I'm sure there were songbirds and all sorts of exotica at the time. Right at the end, there's a view of a sort of a sunset. When you go around the side of the thing, you see how it works. So that's on the left is the end of the pergola thing. And on the right is this curved wall on which they've painted the sunset. And the whole thing. Isn't that fantastic? So do you see, you know, from a distance you think you're walking towards an idyllic sunset. And the fact, of course, you know, I suppose you never get far enough to realise that you're not. Anyway, here's another corner of that garden, and just some garden building and a wonderful sort of louvered, roofed, strange thing that must be for growing something, I suppose, and protect. You know, the Prince Elector, or whoever it was who built the place, obviously felt that his life wasn't really complete without a mosque, and obviously he wasn't Muslim or anything like that. He just felt mosques were just so scenic, you know, and why not? I mean, I think I'd quite like a mosque in a way. It is a very splendid mosque, isn't it? Look at it, and it's got minarets and everything, and then inside it's all gaily painted, but at the time it was all locked up, so you couldn't get into it. Here is how it looked back in 1820. So pretty. And then there's a whole kind of courtyard thing in front of it with these sort of cloisters. And then here's some sort of pavilion covered in coral stone or something. And then looking on the right there's a sort of a ruin. And it's all, you know, it's meant to be like an English landscape garden. It's very sort of methodically done. So it's quite sort of charmingly, you know, unconvincing at times. And there is an incredibly beautiful thing there, which I couldn't get into. I don't know, that might be it. But anyway, somewhere there is a bathroom. There's like a Turkish bath, and it's so beautiful. And it was photographed in World of Interiors years ago. And I think I went there that day hoping to see inside it, and of course the bloody thing was locked. Wouldn't it be nice to have a ruin? Anyway, so now this is a quick stop in Würzburg, the fantastic, enormous palace of the Prince Bishop, mad Rococo plasterwork. Look at that, isn't that crazy? And then this is an equally crazy sort of monument to Bacchus on the staircase, I think. And, you know, as it was the palace of a Prince Bishop, it's quite nice that he was celebrating Bacchus in a really big way. Lovely, that glass. I like that. And here's a bit more of the crazy plasterwork. My German is terrible, but let's say it's Veitshochheim, another garden, a small sort of, you know, summer palace for the Prince Bishop of Würzburg. This is again sort of 1770. Shady pavilion that you can sit in, you see, and then you sit on the bench and you've got this fantastic view going through, framed by this oval frame, and then all these cuts through the hedge. And then right at the end, I suppose, there was a bit of sculpture or something that you could look at. But it's such a delightful place. Of course, none of the water is working, but there was once water coming out of this. That bench is wonderful, isn't it? With the carved stone, sort of draped cloth. And then here's another little corner of the garden. And there is a bit of water, look. Tiny bit of water working. But of course, originally, it would have been just gushing water everywhere, which would have been so wonderful. And then here, a whole kind of alley of sort of ruins. But who's that? Is that Bacchus again? And then here, a rather marvellous, strange sort of monument. Lots of animals, and they love animals, you know. And this is a fantastic picnic spot, isn't it? With these strange sort of nascent palm trees, aren't they, holding up this little roof, and then a little table, and then there are funny little stool seats at the base of the palm trees, and the whole thing carved out of stone. Fragments of ruins. Totally fake, obviously. And then right at the end is this sort of Belvedere pavilion. Belvedere pavilion sitting on a whole grotto, and sort of sweeping stairs going up both sides. And obviously the whole of this rockwork thing would have been dripping with water originally. And so there would have been just water pouring down. I mean, it must have been fantastic. Little pavilion upstairs where I suppose you went in and had a cup of tea or a drink or something. And then all the niches in the rockwork, do you see, are filled with animals. Because I bet they had water spurting out of their mouths and things, don't you think? I don't know what that is. Is that a hare down there being bothered by a bird? Probably taken from Aesop's fables. And here, I suppose that's an alligator. And then going quickly into the Schloss, the little summer palace there. And there are these very charming rooms decorated about 1800 or something, with lovely wallpaper still on the walls, which is such a miracle, isn't it? And here's another fantastic wallpaper. Anyway, now we're going to go to a very tragic garden indeed, also in Germany. And this is at Heidelberg, that was made for an English princess. And so the daughter of James I, Princess Elizabeth, who married Frederick the Elector Palatine in sort of 1615 or something. And then in 1620, the citizens of Bohemia invited Frederick to go and be their king instead, because they didn't want a Catholic king, they wanted a Protestant king. And they were there in Prague, and then, you know, it all went wrong because the emperor got very cross about the whole thing. And there was the Battle of the White Mountain, and so they only lasted for 1 year and 4 days, and then they had to go in exile in Holland. But anyway, so they could never go back to Heidelberg. So here you can see the sort of the gate, and behind is the old Schloss, which is pretty much a ruin. The garden now, really, it is a complete ruin. There's almost nothing to see there. But you can see the whole thing in the Book of the Garden. And this is the Book of the Garden, the Hortus Palatinus, published by Salomon de Coos, who was the garden designer and hydraulic engineer who made the garden. And he and his father, Isaac de Coos, I think, or maybe Isaac was the son, can't remember. But they had worked in England at Wilton, made the garden there, which is now all gone as well, and then gone to Heidelberg because of that English connection, and made this incredible garden. And so it survives really just in this book. And so here is the whole layout of the garden. And so you can see the schloss that's now ruined there, and then there's this whole terrace, and down far below is the town of Heidelberg. And so you see they had little houses around the edge of the garden that were newly built, and this amazing terrace, and then just incredible things going on. So here's a part of the garden with these 3 gates and sort of knot gardens. But it was the greatest Renaissance garden in Germany, the greatest one north of the Alps, really. And these engravings do sort of relate to a lot of these alchemical engravings and Rosicrucian engravings. So it's, there is some reason to the theory that the whole place was a sort of a message, a Rosicrucianism. So under the terrace, a sort of grotto, and so this used to be filled with sculpture and water and everything. And so it used to look something like this, lumps of stone with coral planted in it, and I'm sure the coral was made of glass or something, and then just endless waterworks and water doing surprising things. And then here the depressing reality today with the ruin on the left, and then some steps that have been restored, but they don't really help and don't really equate to things like this. Look at that fantastic thing, a column of water dripping down it. And what about this fellow? Isn't that a marvellous thing? And there's obviously, pipe work to make, it look like she's really wringing out her hair. It must have been so wonderful. And then here, a mad sort of construction, all covered in mossy plants, and it's got little bushes growing out of the top. And then underneath there's a figure in a fountain. Fantastic. This guy is still there today. He's obviously representing some local river, isn't he? And he used to have water gushing out of his urn. And then this is the reality today. So this is, a tremendous feature of the garden that's rather ruined, part of the wall there, and you can see it's sort of collapsing. And then above, an awful sort of villa that's been built by some retired dentist on the hill above. Horrid. But anyway, let's look at the ruined feature. And look at the way, do you see it? That entire sort of rusticated, heavy bit of architecture on the left is sitting on a wild boar, which is a fantastically sort of, a German joke, I think, there. But here's the design for that, or the record of it. And I'm not sure, I think perhaps the book was published after, everything went wrong. The book's published in 1620. So maybe just at the exact moment when everything went wrong. It must have been very kind of topical, That's it for Heidelberg. So we're now going to go to Italy. And we can all breathe a bit of a sigh of relief, probably. But isn't that print marvellous? And I love all the animals disporting themselves over that slightly mad piece of exaggerated architecture.